Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Kotsaruba, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and we are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees today, and a special thanks to Kristen Cody and the entire Sandbox AQ team. This afternoon, we are going to hear from our panelists, followed by a Q&A session, and we will also have some poll questions for you to answer. So before we begin, I really want to encourage you to submit questions of your own in the Q&A section of this platform. And then also remember to answer the polls as they come up throughout the discussion in order to ensure that you receive your CPE credit. So with that all said, I'd love to welcome our panelists. So please come on camera and come off of mute so that we can start out with a round of introductions. So share with us who you are, what agency or organization you represent, and what your role is there. So if we could start with Dr. Jones, please, if you want to come on camera and unmute yourself.
Yeah, so thanks for having me here. Really a pleasure and always a privilege to be alongside such illustrious experts. My name is Gary Jones. I am the Associate Chief for Strategic Technology. I work out of the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. My main purpose over there is to gather R&D requirements for emerging technology to help support our CISA divisions in accomplishing their mission, which is to help to reduce the risk of any threats against critical infrastructure. So thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Let's jump over to Lucy next.
Hello, I am Lucy Holmans. I work with the Federal Aviation Administration. My group is really responsible for anything in the operational environment, anything that requires movement of an aircraft in terms of cybersecurity, all the way from the generation of requirements to doing any type of authorizations on any asset within the operational environment, to coming up with enterprise security solutions, all the way through the decommissioning of a specific asset within the operational environment. So really, we kind of do the whole life cycle of anything that really is within the air traffic organization environment.
Fantastic, thank you. Let's hear from Nick next, please.
Thanks, Kirsten, and thanks to everyone in attendance. I'm glad that we can spend an hour here together talking about quantum, one of my favorites. So I'm Nick Reese. I'm the co-founder of Frontier Foundry Corporation, and I'm the former Director of Emerging Tech Policy at the Department of Homeland Security. In that role, my team was instrumental in putting together some of the quantum policies and directives that we are likely going to talk about today. So I'm glad to be here for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. And then Wes, please intro yourself next.
Thank you. Thanks, Kirsten. I appreciate that. And I'd like to thank my co-panelists for being here today as well. It's an honor to be here with such a distinguished group of folks talking about such an important topic. Thank you to the ATARC team for putting this on. So I'm Wes Green. I am the head of public sector growth at Sandbox AQ. And Sandbox AQ is a quantum information sciences company that is dedicated to helping move forward quantum across multiple aspects of the applications community. And today, we're really looking forward to talking more around cybersecurity and how companies like us do enhance and work with customers on walking out the journey to enhance critical infrastructure cybersecurity.
Fantastic, thank you. So jumping into my first question then, we don't need to go in any particular order, but maybe Gary, you can kick us off again with this first question. And for the rest of the panelists, if you want to just pop off mute or use the raise hand icon if you'd like to go next, otherwise I'll just call on you. But Gary, I want to start off by talking about what are some of the greatest risk risks facing our critical infrastructure, and how can cyber and quantum innovation help to address some of these vulnerabilities? If you could speak to one or two that just come top of mind, and then I'll hear from the other panelists as well.
Sure thing. Great question, Kristen. I think the greatest risk or factor that's facing the U.S. critical infrastructure is really the insufficient cyber resilience, or the ability to really anticipate, predict, withstand, recover, and adapt to threats from adversaries. The critical infrastructure operators should understand the dependencies among their services and products, and the IT and OT systems used to create and deliver them. That knowledge incorporated with the cyber resiliency techniques can really help to reduce any probability of a catastrophic cyber incident, or even the minor incidents that we have day to day. And it can really help to really not impact our daily lives. I think if we look at other significant risks that we have is the insufficient cyber expertise within the OT operators, just leading to system misconfigurations, poor cybersecurity practices, and our favorite, phishing attacks. They're susceptible to phishing attacks. So the other one I would say, is when you look at risk, when we take a cybersecurity approach, to OT, we take the same approach for IT as we do to OT, and they're different. OT, these systems are built for reliability and longevity, and their ability to run for decades, and they're in place already. And when we try to bolt on cybersecurity to them, it doesn't fit well. And I often use this analogy. If you're building a plane, you can't just stick a 747 wing and a Cessna wing, and then maybe a Learjet engine. It'll be a plane, but it won't work well. So you tend to have things that really fall apart. So I think when we look at, and I think your second question was, when we look at quantum computers, we don't know when quantum computers will be available, but they will be able to. I think there's promises and threats in that as well. They'll be able to help us secure that cyber that critical infrastructure. They'll be able to solve some cybersecurity problems that classical computing really can't solve today. But of course, on the threat side, now we look at the PQC, or the post-quantum cryptography, where it can, we have to establish that protection. We have to get our OT and critical infrastructure, systems to that part where it's PQC, so that we can have that protection against any kind of threats from quantum computers.
Yeah, thank you for kicking us off there, Gary. And Nick, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, so I really appreciated Gary's comments there. And as usual, we find ourselves in agreement about these types of things. But I think, one of the first things to get to your question is we have to talk about the context in which we're all operating, right? And the context for critical infrastructure right now is that critical infrastructure is a target. And we've seen this with Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. We've seen how adversaries look at critical infrastructure, and it's no longer hands off of that, right? It's a target very, very directly. And the second piece of context here that I think is really important is that we are also looking at a world where emerging technologies are creating these power law increases in capabilities. And that's not lost on adversaries either. So they're bringing emerging technologies to target our most critical infrastructure. So I think we first have to kind of create the context around that. The second thing is, we have to start thinking about how we are going to use emerging technology capabilities to improve how we understand risk, improve how we, secure our networks and our systems. And, to me, it's an implementation question. There's a lot of really great solutions out there, but we need to be able to bring them to the critical infrastructure. We need to be able to put them in place and have a good, well-informed, educated workforce who is taking stock of all of it and running this process. So I think, the context is really important. And then I think it's an implementation challenge after that.
Thank you, Nick. And Lucy, I want to open up the floor to you next, but I also kind of want to add, where do you see the private sector being able to play a part in helping to support the government's efforts to bolster cybersecurity for critical infrastructure? But if you have additional comments based on what's just been said, please go ahead and share with us.
Sure. Thank you. So from my perspective, some of the most the biggest risk right now is really around the ease with which you can actually conduct a cyber attack, right? With the emerging technologies, I think it's a lot easier. I think then it opens up a lot of different threat vectors that didn't exist there before. And then also, just how integrated everything is getting. So, you go to a lot more, if you look at even telecommunications as a whole, you see a lot of IP-based types of connectivity, which in the past, when you thought about critical infrastructure, it didn't really exist as much as it does today. So that again increases the threat vectors, the type of attacks that can happen, and just the ability of more people being able to actually take advantage of those vulnerabilities. In terms of how private sector can really help, just really assume that the technologies will actually be there to break the encryption that we have today. I know that there's a lot of speculation as to when that would happen, but go with the assumption that technology is moving at a pretty quick pace, and that in the next potential couple of years that's a possibility. So always think with the mindset that is it not so much is it possible, just assume that it is, and what can you do now to try and prevent it from happening, and looking at what kind of quantum resistant type of technologies can you implement, what type of out of the box type of implementations can you now propose that would actually then deter any type of additional breaking of encryption, or just the use of quantum to for an attack. So to me, from a private sector standpoint, I'd really be looking for, again, some out of the box types of thinking, and also understanding that, hey, yes, it might be 10 years out, but just assume that it's 2 years out. And that's really the mindset that really needs to kind of permeate throughout the the different vendors I know that we're going to be looking for on the FAA side, especially.
Awesome. And then Wes, I want to open it up to you next, but we also have a audience question written in about, just short of keeping tabs on the technology as it matures and potential future planning, what should people be doing to prepare? So if you could shed some light on that question as well, that would be great.
Sure, I appreciate it. So if I go back to the first question that you asked, and then I'll roll into that last one, is a couple of areas from my perspective, and I'm going to build on some things that Gary and Nick and Lucy said. Was one of them is, I think we have to start to begin to recognize that cryptography management is a core piece of our critical infrastructure, and that cyber infrastructure is critical infrastructure. And as we think about the definition of critical infrastructure, I think it's evolving over time, and people have often thought about the physical components of like our country's critical infrastructure. I mean, I think now we need to extend that out to the cyber components of our critical infrastructure and the IT components of our critical infrastructure. And so one of the things that I'm going to just build upon that Gary said briefly was this: he talked about, how organizations kind of, they build over time, and they morph and they merge and they reorganize. And Gary, I love the analogy around, bolting the different wings on, because sometimes when you look at organizations that have grown and changed and morphed over time, that topography of our networks, that topography of our IT landscapes, it gets very complex and very gnarly. And and I think having ways to be able to get in and do automated discovery that gets down to a very granular level that illuminates what's in those networks. Do we have outdated components of, say, like cryptography? Do we have outdated foundational components of our infrastructure that are open to some of the kind of rapidly evolving technologies and attacks that Lucy talked about. I think there's quite a bit there that I find is really interesting, for an area for focus on. And then lastly, maybe building a little bit on one of the things that Lucy just said too, is if you think about store now and decrypt later attacks, she's right. We don't necessarily know when encryption can or will be broken. It's kind of this kind of hazy clock on what our data sovereignty period looks like. Oftentimes organizations have data sovereignty needs that go out 5, 10, 20 years. And so beginning to make that shift to PQC that Gary talked about, I think is also critical, so that you're not waiting and you are able to protect across kind of a very different kind of landscape for cyber threats that are rapidly evolving. I do think that's critical.
Thank you, Wes. And Gary, please go ahead.
Yeah, if we have enough time, I just have a brief piece. And Wes, you're really hitting the stuff home, and all the panelists are. And I just want to focus in on something Lucy said, and the second part of your question, which was the private sector. And I really think I've got to mention this because it's something that CISA has really been pushing, and this is, the private sector can really help by designing IT and OT systems that are secure by design and secure by default. And you've probably heard our director speak pretty intensely about these approaches. This approach, it will really help to reduce the cybersecurity human resources, I think, needed to really increase increase cyber resiliency of critical infrastructure. Many of the critical infrastructure operators come from relatively small businesses and have limited resources. So that limited access to cybersecurity expertise really kind of makes it, it puts a little too much strain on their business, and so we're looking for the private sector to really assist and really build things that can help these smaller businesses and really impact critical infrastructure in a positive way.
Thank you, Gary, for adding that. And if there's any other comments here, we can hang out here for a couple more minutes. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and call for our first poll question. So if we could get that up on the screen. All right, poll question number 1. In your opinion, why is migrating to post-quantum cryptography relevant at this time? So for our audience at home, please go ahead and respond to that. Any other question or comments there before we continue on to my next question, or are we good? Let's see. We do have an audience question. Let me read that out loud real quick. Dr. Jones, Nick, and Lucy talked about PQC, but how about preparing for attacks, remote or local, on quantum computers? What preventative measures can we take? How prepared are we as of today? So if that is a question any of our government panelists would like to respond to, that is over in the Q&A chat. Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, I can take part of that at least. So, I mean, one of the interesting things about quantum computers is that, obviously if you've seen a photo of it, it's got that kind of like chandelier look, and, it's a big, you could stand under it. But behind it, there's a classical computing stack that is a part of the quantum computing system. And so one of the things that we were looking at for a while is making sure that classical computing stack is cyber secure, so that obviously data going into the quantum computer is cyber secure when we're making these calculations. And there are a variety of different ways that quantum computers are built. So there's not a single method by which we build quantum computers, and there's many companies trying many different things. And so I think at some point, whether it's a formal kind of standardization process or it's the market kind of coalescing around a particular approach, in either case, the cybersecurity of the quantum computer itself, particularly that classical stack that we're using to help control it, is going to be critical so that we can continue to develop some of these great capabilities.
Thank you, Nick. And any other panelists want to chime in? Gary, go ahead.
Sure, I'll jump in on that too. I think when you look at kind of preparing yourself for it is we put out the memo regarding preparation for agencies. I think some of the most important parts of that memo is understanding what you need to protect, right? A lot of times, whenever a new threat comes out or a new technology, people go out and they start buying stuff and start really I would say storing away for the tornado that's coming, right? And then the tornado, you've got all the stuff that you really don't need. But I think we really have to pay attention to NIST and wait for their parameters to come out. That's one of the first things to be before we really start doing anything. So we have really strong scientists working on this problem. The other part of it is understanding what you need to protect in the sense of inventorying not only your systems but your data. Your data is really what what adversaries are going to be after. So understanding the life cycle of the life cycle of your data, what's important to you, and making sure that you have protections in place, because there's some data that is not going to be useful for you when a quantum computer hits or cryptographically relevant quantum computer hits. So and that is where we really have to make sure that we're prepared for. So prepare in the sense of understanding what you have within your organization or wherever you're working.
Excellent points. Thank you for that. And Lucy, I'd love to start with you on my next question here. It's with the administration's memorandum toward directing agencies to transition toward a post-quantum cryptography future. What factors do you see as being the biggest hurdles in post-quantum cryptography adoption, such as like money, authority, requirements, or maybe something I haven't mentioned?
Right. And so, I mean, those are typically the things that you do look at in terms of, do you have enough resources and including funding, et cetera, to implement what you need to. But more importantly, I think it's really more of preparing the workforce to be able to understand what the implications are. So that's anywhere from training to changing the culture. It's going to be a different way of doing business when you have the added complexities of what AI brings to the table or machine learning brings to the table. It's not so much, trying to figure out the best solutions, but maybe even from some perspectives, understanding how to best manage what those potential outcomes could be, right? So again, it's really shifting and the workforce's mindset into what they currently have to deal with today, right? And again, sometimes when you're talking about critical infrastructure, the mindset is a little bit that you're a little bit isolated typically, but in reality, things again are getting more and more interconnected. But again, it's changing that mindset to be open to a lot more different types of possibilities in terms of outcomes, understanding and training the workforce to be ready for that, and then just being sure that you can even dry run those types of scenarios, right? So it's not just a matter of training, it's actually even having the workforce experience it through an exercise or some sort of dry run as well. So to me, it's more about preparing the workforce and more so than I think the funding. I think there's been a lot of attention brought to cybersecurity, brought to quantum, a lot of especially with all the executive orders that have been coming out on it. But to me, I think it's really going to be the workforce in the end that's going to have to deal with it. So to me, I think that's where a little bit of the focus, or maybe a lot of the focus, needs to be.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And Wes, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I would. So when I think about what the administration done, I think in many ways they've done a great job, as Lucy commented on and Gary commented on, with regards to the national security memorandums that have come out, with the various legislation that has talked about that we do need to prep the environment for a quantum future. I think that's key. I think having a requirement for discovery is a great way to start that journey. I do think one of the things that I've encountered as I've been talking with, my colleagues across government is, we have a series of requirements and timelines that have come out, But there hasn't necessarily been those things that, Lucy did touch on the funding piece of it. And I don't want to hit that too much because I think she very accurately called out that, it has been talked about a lot. But when we see our colleagues in government and they say, hey, we have new requirements of things that we have to do, but we don't also have necessarily resources that go with how do we service those requirements? How do we get to the outcomes of those requirements? So I do think that that's a critical step. In addition to that, I would like to build upon, the call that Lucy had around education of the workforce and talking about it. One of the things that's, I think, different here, especially as we start talking about quantum, is we have a language change where there's entire new definitions, there's entire new outcomes, there's entire new types of systems. And there is definitely that component of spending time with the workforce and helping the workforce understand, how do they begin to internalize what are the new best practices that they need to be focusing on as they'll continue their missions.
Yeah, thank you, Wes. And kind of to go along with that, an audience member writes in, James Paisley, on the note of preparation. He asks what steps can be taken to prep small and medium-sized enterprises for the algorithm change. Are they forced to rely on their service providers, or are there specific resources or actions that these SME, SMBs can be taking? So if our panelists have any insight into that, Gary, I see you came off mute.
Yeah, and the thoughts I had on it kind of really pushes. Yeah, I would say it really touches on that. So, and I look at it in terms of the vendors, right? The folks who are developing our software and things like that. So, the PQC transition is really going to be controlled by, when each software, developer or vendor issues their updates in their products with PQC algorithms. When these products and updates are available, they're gonna need to be installed, and this is the thing, with small business. So you're gonna have custom applications from small business because you're gonna have that, and you're gonna have some custom applications with larger organizations. You're gonna have some legacy systems, and that's where you're really gonna have a challenge. And for these customized solutions. But I think industry can really help with tools to automate the inventory and process to identify these systems. And I think our Sandbox AQ folks are on that path. And the other thing I would say, vendors don't necessarily release updates at the same time. So you're going to have that mishmash of systems that do have PQC and systems that don't. And this is where I think NIST really comes in, and they recommended an agile, like a crypto agility approach, and that's going to help with a coexistence of what we have currently and what is PQC capable. So as you transition, and that's why it's important as you inventory and you start to prioritize. What is the most important that I need to switch over to my PQC systems? And what do I need to make sure that what can I keep on the standard side until I get to the PQC, until I fully transition to PQC. So that's really important, I think, is understanding what needs to be on the PQC side and have that coexistence.
Thank you, Gary. Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And so, I have to admit that I was initially going to say something like workforce, but the other panelists have read my mind. So the first thing I think is important here is I'd like to acknowledge the policy and legal environment and what is actually a really consistent, very straight line that across government that is setting priorities here. And I want to acknowledge that because that's actually kind of, I think, really important in this conversation. This journey kind of went from some policies and work at the agency level to the executive branch into legislation. And that's not something that you see a lot, but it also demonstrates alignment. And it demonstrates alignment behind transitioning to post-quantum cryptographic algorithms. And when we say that, what we're talking about are asymmetric algorithms, right? Like that is what those policies say. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not room for, there's not use cases for symmetric and things like that, but the alignment is behind that transition. And I think one of the challenges here is we have to realize that this is not the last time that we're going to transition a cryptographic algorithm. We thought it would take billions of years to break RSA, but it turns out that, a fellow named Peter Shor in a really fancy computer can get it done, right? So we're going to have to build in at the hardware level, and even better if it's software defined, cryptographic agility. And that is something that is, I think creating an industry demand behind that so that we, vendors see that demand and start creating those products, I think would be a great path toward that. And then, Kirsten, I hope it's okay, but I'm going to jump into one of the questions that I saw on the questions. There was a question about NIST and the post-quantum cryptographic algorithms. So those are scheduled to be released in 2024. And I believe the rest of the question was about what type of algorithms they are. So so mostly they're based on a completely different math, lattice learning with errors, which is a totally different kind of mathematical construct for the public key and the private key, instead of prime number factorization, which is what RSA and the like is based on.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, thanks for answering that for Nick Edwards. Another audience question that I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to chime in on or not, but Steve Hollins writes in, I believe QKD, quantum key distribution, and PQC can coexist and can be used in a layered security model. So he asks what the panel's opinion is on that, if we have an opinion on that. Go ahead, Gary.
So I can jump in at the risk of my children going hungry. I'm about to say, but the QKD, I think is it's got some limitations, and it doesn't necessarily have the recommendation of one of our more powerful government agencies. And I think there are some places that it can be used, and PQC I think is a different level. I would say the recommendation would be to head towards PQC if possible. If this is something, because QKD there's distance limitations. It's not as secure because you're still using a key and things like that we can go deeply into. But I would say PQC and QKD are independent, right? So you don't need anything layered per se. You don't need to hit QKD first and then go to PQC. PQC, I think, is a different animal. I think it's where, as an organization, that's where I think most of the recommendations sit, is at the PQC level. QKD may be a lower tier that is usable right now until we get to a CRQC that may be able to even break that as well. So just understand there's trade-offs with limitations and with distance limitations and possibly speed or anything like that. So I think there's a lot. They're very independent of each other.
Awesome, thank you. And we do have a lot of audience questions that have come through. We have like 3 remaining. So if you do see any that you'd like to respond to, you can always type the answers. Hopefully we can get to them later, but I am going to call for poll question number 2 before we do that. So if we could get that up on the screen. Which of the following accurately represents the principles of the zero trust architecture? So poll for our audience. And my next question is around the administration's national cybersecurity strategy, calling for the harmonization of cyber resiliency. And whoever wants to respond to this one first, just go ahead and throw your hand up. But the question is, are there requirements or network infrastructure gaps that the private sector, including cloud service providers, are failing to meet?
I guess I can jump in on this one as well. I don't want to, go too far, but so I think we've got to understand that there's no perfect security, right? So we expect basic physical security controls to be deployed in any organization operating with critical infrastructure. We should expect that basic cybersecurity controls are in place as well. That I think the audience has to understand that controls like MFA, multi-factor authentication, least privilege, and others are relatively low cost, but basic controls that kind of increase the effort for adversaries to achieve our goals. Those are things that we can put in place and need to be in place. I think the national cyber strategy also seeks to find ways to align responsibility for cybersecurity with those in the position that can possibly do more. Reliance on end users, provide, for security of their systems that don't necessarily work. The question I don't think necessarily is whether they're failing to meet a specific requirement, the providers, but how we can partner with private sector to help drive security in new ways by implementing that secure by design, better hygiene, new standards, and secure by default approaches. And those the partnership is not the failing, but the partnership with private sector to help them to find the right return on investment for implementing new design approaches.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Thanks for jumping in there. And would any of our other panelists like to weigh in on that? We've got about a few more minutes we can stay on this topic for. Go ahead, Wes.
Sure, thanks. One of the things that I've observed is that within industry, there's, like Gary said, I don't know that I would necessarily use the word failing, but I think there's different approaches, and I think there's different perspectives on, technology maturity levels. I think there's different approaches to what the outcome should be as people are looking at this future and trying to figure out how do they transition and bridge gaps. One of the things that I would say that's been interesting is at times you see folks that maybe come across a little bit like they're naysayers to, oh, we don't need to worry about this. It's 5 years off, 10 years off, or 20 years off. And at times I think that can maybe cause portions of that public-private partnership that Gary was talking about to maybe pause and say, wait, is this something we really need to go forward with, when other portions of the community are really saying, no, there's a lot here in terms of threat actors, in terms of time to transition technologies, where we need to keep moving that progress forward. And so I think one of the things that, from my perspective, that maybe would be helpful from an industry perspective is to say, how do we focus on forward motion versus getting into maybe that perfect outcome? Like Gary mentioned, there is no such thing as a perfect outcome. I think there does need to be that continual motion of forward progress and trying to get to outcomes.
Thanks, Wes. Anyone else before we move on to the next question? We have a little bit of time here that we can spend.
So I just wanted to maybe add, so I know, like, from an FAA standpoint, we're always looking to ensure that we've got monitoring capabilities, right, even within a cloud environment. And yes, you can, I guess, always work it into your terms and conditions, but part of it is since it is a shared responsibility, sometimes the inability to not necessarily see what's going on with your data or what you're trying to communicate out becomes an issue. And so sometimes finding ways so that you do enable, right, some government entities to be able to see within a cloud environment And then also the other piece of this too is that now there's different ways of communications, right? So you've got this whole space link here as well these days. And so what does that mean? And how does that now supplement what we're trying to do in going from potentially a cloud to potentially a satellite-based types of communication when you think about things like Starlink? And so, how can we better then integrate those different now types of ways of transmitting information so that they become complementary, that they also become backups of each other. And so, I don't necessarily see a lot of the integration between all the different types of ways that we can kind of communicate information. So maybe a little bit more time spent on that as well would be worthwhile, because and I just actually came back from a detail on the Space Force. And so some of that, and looking to see, how can the DoD actually leverage commercial infrastructure, knowing that, obviously then you've also got to think about the types of requirements that would be needed from a DoD perspective. But, again, it's kind of just looking at all the different ways that now we are able to transmit information, and how can we leverage that and actually work together on figuring out how maybe they can even become ways of backing up each other, backing up those different types of communication paths.
Of course, I was on mute. Thank you for adding to that, Lucy. I'm going to go ahead and call for our third and final poll question. If we could get that up on the screen here. And this will be the last one for our audience. How do you perceive the relationship between PQC and zero trust architecture? And the next question I want to ask, let's start with Nick, if you don't mind, but again, around the private sector relationship, what can the private sector do to support the US government's efforts to protect against cyber vulnerabilities, both those that are developing solution and then those that are running our critical infrastructure?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I think this is the kind of age-old question of public-private partnerships and what makes a good public-private partnership, what makes for good cyber information sharing. And I having been on the government side and now on the private sector side, there's I always feel like the issue is that we weren't ever speaking the same language. Like none of us are rooting for the ransomware gangs, right? We all want the same thing, but we don't tend to speak the same language. And so I think, as a way to enhance information sharing and enhance cooperation, I would call for kind of a detail program where, or maybe fellowship, whatever you want to call it, where we can kind of trade people throughout the workforce to do some time in the private sector, have public sector people come to the private sector and vice versa, and gain a better understanding of exactly the priorities, the bottom lines, the missions, the limitations that each entity has. Because there are great capabilities being developed by the private sector in a lot of different areas that are going to contribute to better cybersecurity. The government is doing a lot of work doing things like the known vulnerabilities database and being proactive in certain engagement forums. But I think that more cross-pollination, so to speak, between the two would, I think, take it to another level. And I would call for kind of a program like that might help us speak the same language a little more fluently.
Yeah, thanks for kicking us off there, Nick. Wes, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I do. I love Nick's discussion around internships and externships, if we think about it in that perspective as well. And there's definitely something to be said for having experience on both sides of that continuum. I started my career out as a government employee, as an Air Force officer, and it still informs a lot of how I think today, even going way back to then. When I think about where we are right now, and we've talked about this journey to PQC, we've talked about this journey around critical infrastructure. That word journey is very impactful for me because it's complex. It takes a while. There's some deep kind of, technological issues that we need to surface in order to work through that. And I think that, that public-private partnership. Wow, that was really difficult. For this journey it's got to be critical. If you think about some of these issues with like cryptography management, critical infrastructure, transition to PQC, those are wide ranging across a lot of industries and a lot of government agencies. It's really complex. We talked earlier about that complexity of the network topographies and the complex kind of various components in the government. Gary talked about, getting to definitions of what should be protected and when it should be protected. I think that there's also a point of, I've seen customers say, where do we even start? How do we begin that journey? What does that journey look like? And I think it's definitely going to take that partnership that Nick talked about. I think it's going to take a little bit of stepping out of our own kind of shoes and into our kind of our customer shoes, or stepping into industry shoes for a little bit, and understanding what's it like to be on that other side of the aisle, so that we can kind of move through that journey of kind of discovery, kind of continuous observability, and then getting to a point where we can even start talking about remediation and what does those look like. But I think it's definitely got to be considered a journey, and it's got to be done hand in hand as a partnership.
Thank you, Wes. We have a few more minutes that we can stay here. So Lucy or Gary, would either of you like to take this? Go ahead, Lucy.
Sure. Yeah. So from an FAA standpoint, I would love to see more simulations of the possibilities, right? So putting in, again, adding in something like an AI, machine learning, and quantum computing, I think there's a lot of unknowns, right? So actually creating and tailoring like a simulated environment using digital twins, et cetera, just trying to understand, what could potentially be, the possible outcomes of having all of these different types of technologies now embedded into a specific environment. And so to me, a little bit of a tailoring to the environment is important, because, when you're talking about air traffic, obviously there's a lot of real-time needs, a lot of real-time communications that become vital. Availability is big within the FAA standpoint, but again, it's really tailoring those types of simulations to the environment so that you could now start thinking of, hey, these are things that we had never considered before, that maybe we now need to change what we thought we needed from an architectural standpoint, or for what we're asking for from a new type of contract that's coming out. So to me, I think it's really important to start thinking about the possibilities, but start thinking about the possibilities based on some known types of data or facts, right? And so to me, creating these simulated types of environments would be a way of doing that. So I don't really know where we're at with that in general, in terms of kind of creating simulated environments with AI, machine learning, and quantum computing. But to me, creating those that are, again, tailored to the specific environments would be, I think, an area that would be beneficial, at least from an air traffic organization standpoint.
Thank you, Lucy. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. So I think we have to, the partnerships are definitely needed. I think almost like a center of excellence. I think we need more of a point person on this, and instead of so many different facets or places that are coming and you're getting different. Oh, we'll do it this way, or do it that way, or do it this way. I think we need a consolidated, group of experts working on particular problems and sending out recommendations and solutions. Just so we don't have this, go that way, go this way, and I think working with private industry, that's the way to do it. Nick, we miss you. Just putting it out there, but. All the folks that go out to the private sector, it's always great to see them and get their different perspectives. But we also need the folks in government who now we're facing different problem sets, right, from when they left. And so not everything is necessarily going to be solved by quantum computing, but sometimes we don't. Those critical infrastructure areas may still need classical computing, because quantum computing may not solve it. There's studies to show that some problems are better solved with classical computing than quantum computing, and we need to understand when to apply certain things. It's just like when we look at AI and ML and everything else, people want to throw that term around in the sense of throwing it at solving every problem. But what they do is actually compound the risk or compound the problem by putting anything like that. So I think centers of excellence that actually have more pointed problem sets that we can solve. And Lucy was talking about putting digital twins. I love that idea, with critical infrastructure, and I really do. And I think that's one of the areas we really need to focus on, and applying as experts at how to use this new and emergent technology. I think we really have to partner with private industry, get that COE, that center of excellence, and solve pointed problems.
Yeah, thank you, Gary, and thank you to all of our panelists for taking that question. As we get towards the end of this discussion, I want to give time for kind of a wrap up or like a key takeaway. I know we've covered a lot of ground here, but this is your opportunity to share with our audience your final thoughts or whatever it is that you want to leave them with based on this discussion. So each panelist has a few minutes here to kind of share what your wrap up from this conversation is. And Lucy, would you mind if we start with you?
Yeah, sure. One area that we didn't really touch on too much was zero trust. And so I do think that zero trust is even more important now than it was in the past in terms of quantum computing and what we need to protect against, kind of talking about, the harvest now, decrypt later. It's really important that we start really implementing zero trust in a way that we are better protecting our data, that we are better protecting our infrastructure, creating those layers of protection, creating that segmentation, reducing the amount, assuming again that you are going to have penetration through these different types of environments, but how do you try and minimize it, right, through the use of zero trust? But that in combination, and in some instances, quantum computing can even be seen as part of your zero trust types of strategy overall, because that you can actually use to help better detect patterns, to better, more quickly identify any types of cyber attacks that are coming on. So to me, trying to ensure that we are looking at it from the perspective that, yes, this is a today problem, not a potential problem or not a tomorrow problem. Address it as if it's going to be sooner rather than later, and using zero trust with that in mind, then understanding what the implications are by creating those different types of environments that we can actually test all of this out. But to me, it's really important that we look at it from the standpoint that this is something that needs to be addressed as if it was happening in the near term. So again, combining it with what we already know and what we're already trying to do with zero trust, there's a lot of convergence here that needs to happen. There's lots of different terminologies and different technologies that we kind of use and hear about, not necessarily do we tie them all together. And I think we're at that point where we really need to have that convergence to ensure that holistically we're really addressing the potential problems around cyber as a whole.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lucy. And let's jump to Nick next, please.
Thanks. And I actually was looking at some of the questions in the question box, and there was one that I think really kind of captured what I would like to wrap up with. And the question was about the Chinese development of a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, and kind of what does that mean? And I think one of the things that I would like to really take away from this is we might not know the exact date when a cryptographically relevant quantum computer is going to be ready, but maybe even more troubling, we don't know where it's going to come from. We don't know who is going to come across the line first and have it. And the part about that is, kind of scary is, if you were the first one to have a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, if you were the leader of a country, would you hold a press conference and show everyone your cryptographically relevant quantum computer? No, you wouldn't, right? You would keep it a secret, and you would use it for as long as you could to decrypt all the data that you've previously stolen, that you're currently intercepting, whatever. And so I think that really speaks to the imperative behind what we're talking about. And sometimes it's hard, and I can tell you from being in a former policymaking role, it was really hard to get the attention of some people, a few steps above me, to be able to say, hey, I know that this feels like it's far away, but it's not as far away as you think. And the reason that that's true is because there are adversaries that are developing this kind of behind the curtain. We don't know how much money, we don't know the progress they're making, we don't know the IP that they are stealing from us or our allies. We don't know what that looks like, and that's a big gap for us. And so the things that we need to do the things now, we need to do the right things now that we can do. And so inventorying, that's in all of the policies, implementing zero trust, lengthening key lengths, things like that are all things we can do now. And it's not a, well, maybe in 10 years kind of thing. It's something that's actively being worked on. And if you miss this, you will be facing a cybersecurity threat unlike anything you've ever seen. So I'm really glad that we were able to have this conversation today, and for everyone for attending.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And we'll jump to Gary next.
So great thing about going, like third or even last is that they hit most of the points on there. But I equate getting, what I'd like to lead with is Nick really brought up a point of trying to get folks and their attention of something that's coming. And I often equate this to, when you have a child and you're saying, oh, well, they're going to go to college. You don't sit there and prepare. Some people do. They sit there and they're like, oh, well, I got to start saving for college when they're 17 years old. Bad idea, right? And it doesn't work out well. You start preparing as early as possible. Some folks even start preparing once they know that they're having a child. And that's always a great way to look at quantum, is that the sooner you get ready, right? And if it does come from if it does come from someone that we don't value as an ally or anything else, then at least we're ready. If we put the safeguards in place, if we put start understanding what damage that a CRQC could do to our organization or system or critical infrastructure or anything like that, and be ready for it or resilient to it, then the threat is not as bad. But if you just keep putting it off until till 1 year before they're about to go to college, or the semester they're about to go to college, it's never going to happen. Trust me, I know. I've been trying to prepare for kids going to college, and it's rough. And the later you stay, it doesn't help. I think Lucy touched on zero trust. I think zero trust is one of the better is the concept that's needed for getting ready for this, because there are so many synergies, especially when you're looking at data and identity and access. Those are really some of the foundational issues that happen with quantum. And so protecting your data, making sure that someone can't steal your identity or break in or break your encryption. Those are things that are resonant in the zero trust concept. So the more they're parallel in some instances, but they have a lot of synergies. So I think as long as we are moving towards that point, and in conjunction with PQC and preparation, I think we're going to be okay. But if we stay till the last minute, I think it's just going to be a bad day.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. And Wes, we will end with you, sir.
Thank you. So, Kirsten, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for hosting us today and moderating the panel. Thank you to ATARC and the folks that have joined today to listen to the panel. Thanks for everybody else that's on the panel here with us today. I've really appreciated the perspectives and listening and kind of learning and during this time. A couple of things that occurred to me in this wrap up. There were some things that both Nick and Gary said that I thought were profound around moving forward, that there's concrete steps that can be taken today, not waiting. Looking at that partnership angle for how do the public sector and the private sector work and move together. And then I really love the word that Lucy used, convergence. She talked about the convergence of zero trust and PQC. We wrote a blog about this in the spring, and it was exactly on that, which was the two are not separate. They're actually conjoined at almost every single stage of zero trust. And so again, that word convergence has a lot there for me. And so I think, for me, I would just end on is that, we're invested in that partnership piece, and then walking out the journey, with folks to kind of get to that new future where quantum is prevalent.
Well said. Thank you, Wes. That was a great way to wrap it up. And with that, we are at the end of our panel discussion today. Please respond if you'd like to receive your CPE credit for this event. And I want to thank our partners at Sandbox AQ for making today possible, also along with our panelists and the folks at home for engaging with us and sending such great questions. So if you enjoyed this content, I'm sure you'll enjoy our next one, which is our quantum speaker series, presenting quantum strategy from a healthcare perspective. You can go register for that on our website. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their week. We'll see you at the next one. Bye.